What do you think Fear and Hunger 3 is going to be about? That's probably the question I've been asked most over the time I've been covering the games, and I always said we simply wouldn't be able to know. Just the jump from 1 to Termina, there wasn't much you could predict. But now that the developer of the games, Miro, has spoken a little bit about his plans, I decided to piece some of it together. There's 3 things in particular that will influence the next game, and oh boy, are we in for a ride. By the way, before we start, Miro has said that he doesn't like watching theory videos sometimes, because he doesn't want his own ideas to be affected, and look, I completely get that. So Miro, if you're watching, please just skip to the wishlist part at this timestamp and implement everything I list there. Thank you.
Beautiful. This is the skin of the killer bone.
So, Twilight. Do I have to give a plot synopsis? Actually, there's probably a lot of people like me who never watched it, so I guess I should. Main girl Bella has to move to the sticks to live with her dad because her mother has to travel for her stepfather's baseball career. Despite being quiet and clumsy, Bella makes friends quickly at her new school. They're all normies though, and she's instead attracted to the mysterious Cullen family, especially Edward. By the way, Robert Pattinson is absolutely hilarious in this movie. The scene with him in biology class made me laugh so hard I actually had to pause the movie. Anyway, she eventually wins him over with her Ponkotsu charms, and he admits to being a vampire. A, sparkly vampire. But he thinks he's a monster. He invites her to meet his family, and they all play baseball together. That's baseball again. Oh right, there's another group of vampires committing murders while the main story is going, and during the baseball game, the 2 groups meet. One of the bad vampires is a hunter, and he decides to make Bella his next target. Something, the bad vampire almost kills Bella, but Edward saves her. It's all very exciting. Bella wants to become a vampire, but Edward doesn't let her. Somehow, this movie goes on for 2 hours. Now, Miro doesn't usually rip plot points directly from the media he's inspired by, or if he does, then they're usually more interesting than Twilight, so let's look at the themes of this movie instead. The most obvious theme is family, or perhaps a more cringe term, found family. The Cullens, being vampires, aren't biologically related, but related through their vampire curse. Their cover story is similar. The parents have adopted the younger looking Cullens, so again, they're not even saying they're biologically related, but just adopted. The strength of their family bond is still heavily emphasized, like when they put their lives on the line for Bella because Edward loves her so much. In reverse, too, Bella starts the movie by talking about how she's willing to sacrifice herself for someone she loves, this person being her mother. Vampire clans in the movie seem to claim a territory, and it's rude to hunt on someone else's area. Normies don't even realize this is happening. There's a big distinction between everyday people and the incredibly powerful Lords of the Night. Well, the vampires don't really have to worry about the night, but you know, it's a vampire thing in general. The police are representative of the normal population, with Bella's father being a police officer compared to her new family of vampires. Werewolves are of course part of the series, and they're hinted at in the first movie, again with the idea of protecting their turf against the vampires as a rival form of the Lords of the Night. Apologies in advance, but I say Lords of the Night a lot in this video. I just think it's a really cool term, and it actually comes up a lot. Also, something weird to keep in mind is the school sports team name, the Spartans. And finally, keep in mind that baseball connection. Look, a few of these notes seem random, but they will make sense later. I'll go into how they think they'll apply to Fear and Hunger 3 after we cover all the inspirations, so let's talk about the next movie listed.
Warriors, come on to play!
The Warriors. If you haven't seen The Warriors, it's an absolute classic and you absolutely should. Look, you and I both know nobody stopped a YouTube video halfway through to watch whatever media it's about, but lucky for you, it's still a banger even if you know the plot, so make sure to watch it later. Time, the 1970s. Setting, New York City, the Big Apple. The city is broken up by street gangs who squabble over turf disputes, but one man wants to change that. Cyrus, the leader of the most powerful gang in the city, calls every other major gang to a big meeting to call a general truce and turn them into one massive force to control the city. The Warriors, a gang from the edge of the city in Coney Island, are in attendance. During the meeting, the leader of another gang called the Rogues shoots and kills Cyrus, sending the meeting into chaos as the police descend. By chance, he blames the Warriors. And while they escape in the chaos, every other gang is told to hunt them down. The movie follows them on their journey back home across dangerous territory, getting into scuffles with rival gangs and the police. The shenanigans they get up to on the way back are all pretty entertaining and all the gangs are awesome, but For the sake of this description, the minutiae isn't super important. Seriously, just go watch it. Now, the themes. You can immediately see some connections to Twilight. The gangs as a kind of family, lords of the night fighting over turf, clear distinctions between them and normal people who are often represented by the police. They don't have to play by the same rules as normies, but they still have to respect the line between them out of fear. The warriors can't remove their gang outfit out of pride. It'd be easy for them to just take it off and sneak by, but that would be a shameful act. In this way, it's a little bit different from the vampires in Twilight. They too have visual indicators that they can't hide, but they try to whenever possible. Chaos and order is an interesting theme in the movie. The gangs, despite seeming chaotic, are trying to impose their order on their turf, and hopefully the whole city. The villainous gang, the rogues, are a force for chaos. In Twilight it's the same. The Cullens and the police are imposing order, but a rogue vampire family are causing chaos. The Lords of the Night, despite their secretive and dark nature, aren't inherently bad or chaotic. And they are Lords of the Night. The city are their playground. They can do almost as they please, as long as they don't trigger the police. The daylight weakens them, or perhaps it's better to say, it changes their mindset. Upon returning to their own turf, the leader of the warriors is disappointed in how pitiful it looks in the daylight. There's some funny connections between the two movies, too. One of the gangs is baseball themed, the Baseball Furies, and baseball was weirdly integral to Twilight's story for some reason. The school sports team in Twilight is named the Spartans, and the story of the Warriors movie is based on an ancient Greek account of soldiers trapped deep in enemy territory, trying to get home. Well, one of the major themes of Fear and Hunger is how stories repeat over the ages. Another theme that Fear and Hunger introduced in Terminator was an ecological one, so let's take a look at the next game on the list to get a better grasp on that. This might be a long one. Final Fantasy VII is a very long game by today's standards, clocking in at around 50 hours. I played it for the first time for this video and I was blown away. It holds up incredibly well and the story is fantastic. Just to note, I played the PC port of the original available on Steam, not the remake, which isn't even finished yet. I'm only going to give the important notes in the plot because Final Fantasy VII is a huge game, so please forgive me for skipping a lot. You play as Cloud Strife, an ex-super soldier of the megacorp Shinra, who are abusing an energy source known as Mako, and slowly draining the life of the planet. He joins an eco-terrorist group known as Avalanche, along with his childhood friend Tifa, and large angry man Barrett. They blow up a Mako reactor in the Shinra capital city of Midgar. Midgar is covered by large plates, and Shinra retaliates by dropping the plate above Avalanche's base, killing not only most of them, but also the civilians in the region. Cloud meets Aerith, the last known member of a race known as the Ancients, or the Cetra. They were an alien race who came to the planet on their search for the Promised Land. Is that a Fear and Hunger reference? Aerith is captured because Shinra want to find the Promised Land, so the party raids Shinra HQ to get her back. While there, Cloud's old commander and idol, Sephiroth, murders the president of Shinra and escapes the city. The party, now being blamed for not only destroying the reactor but now also killing the president of Shinra, have to bail. As the party regroup after escaping the city, Cloud tells them what he knows about Sephiroth. When he was part of Shinra's army, he and Sephiroth visited his hometown because its Mako reactor was being attacked by monsters. There, Sephiroth discovered that his mother, Genova, was secretly a member of the ancient Cetra, who was found after being buried for 2,000 years. The Mako reactor in the town contained awful experiments. Beings infused with Mako energy in an attempt to make more people like Sephiroth, being powered by the body of his mother, Genova. He goes mad and tries to free her, but Cloud tries to stop him. Cloud can't remember what happened next, but he somehow survived. And Sephiroth was claimed to be dead. Cloud decides that he is the #1 threat to the world, and since the party have nothing better to do, they follow him. The party follows Sephiroth to an ancient Cetra temple, and he reveals his plan: to use the black materia to summon Meteor and destroy the planet. By doing this, he'll absorb the souls of all living things, known as the Lifestream, as the planet attempts to use him to heal its wounds from being attacked by Meteor. Cloud loses control of himself and hands over the black materia, and Sephiroth escapes. Aerith leads the party to enter an ancient Cetra city to pray to the planet, and when the party catch up, this happens. The famous scene. catching up with Sephiroth again, they discover that Jenova wasn't actually an ancient, but an evil alien whom the Cetra tried to stop. It killed most of the ancients, but the survivors contained Jenova in a crypt. Eons later, Shinra discovered Jenova and used her cells to make Sephiroth and many clones of him, including Cloud. Sephiroth uses the black materia to summon Meteor and start his doomsday plans. The planet responds by activating its own ancient weapons, called, Weapon, which attack anything they deem as a threat to the planet. Cloud falls into the livestream but is rescued, and Tifa helps him recover his memories. He wasn't actually a clone of Sephiroth, but was injected with Jenova cells which allowed Sephiroth to exert some control over him. He wasn't even a member of the Super Soldier Squad. He failed to get in, but due to trauma had confused his memory of his past with stories from his friend Zack, who was. Tifa helps him accept the truth, and he rejoins the party. The party learned that the reason Aerith had travelled to the ancient city of the Cetra by herself was to retrieve a materia which contained the spell Holy, a special spell that can stop Meteor. In lieu of this, Shinra attempts to destroy Meteor with a Mako cannon, but fails. Instead, they use it to attack Sephiroth's protective shield and open the way to him. The party attack the now vulnerable crater and kill both Jenova and Sephiroth. Then, the planet is free to use Holy to destroy Meteor, and everyone lived happily ever after, until the sequel movie came out. Ooh, okay, so, what are the themes of Final Fantasy VII? Well, the most obvious is the ecological theme. A lot of people think the game is just anti-technology, but that's not quite the case. Both technology and nature, which is represented in game by magic and materia, are shown to be used for good and evil. Obviously, Shinra represent the misuse of technology, but some of it is used for good by the party, like when they capture the airship. In fact, Shinra try to do some good by attacking Meteor and Sephiroth's shield, so even they aren't 100% evil. The planet's defenses aren't unambiguously good, too. Despite saving the planet being the goal, the weapons turn on humans with little reason. Sephiroth is happy to use magic for his own goals too, as Meteor seems to be a magical, natural event. His ultimate attack, Supernova, is explicitly a fusion between magic and technology. It uses magical symbols and scientific notation when it's triggered. The point is, these forces aren't inherently good or evil. Good and evil are a human conception. The planet just wants to keep itself whole, and science, well, it doesn't really want anything since it's not a living entity. It's how these things are used that they constitute good or evil. A central theme in the game is the heart's desire, or maybe the desire to help others. Similar to Twilight, all the party put themselves at risk to save others, particularly their loved ones. The final fight seems like a one-way trip, and Cloud disbands the party and tells them to only come back if they really have something to fight for. In fact, throughout the game, many characters sacrifice themselves. Sephiroth sacrifices himself and his legion of clones to become an avatar of destruction. Aerith sacrifices herself to pray to the planet for the ultimate spell to save everyone. It's prominent in many of the smaller stories too, but we'll be here all day if I list them off. The final major theme is identity. Cloud takes on the identity of his friend, Zack. The identity and history of Sephiroth is a complete mystery. Genova's identity is thought to be a Cetra, but she's actually an evil alien, and more. It wraps back into the question of the heart's desire. If you don't know who you are, how can you know what you want? Sephiroth discovers the truth about his mother and starts to embody the Scourge himself. Aerith enters the city of her forebears and starts to embody their harmony with the planet. Like Fear and Hunger, it's another ancient tale repeating itself. The child of Genova and the child of the ancients, fighting over the planet once again. For some minor connections, the Twilight vampires are only half vampire, and funnily enough, there's a vampire that isn't really a vampire in Final Fantasy VII too. Vincent is the result of scientific experiments, and he's probably closer to Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, or perhaps some kind of werewolf, despite visually looking very much like a vampire. Midgar, the main city in the game, is broken up into sectors. It's divided into 8 sectors, and each one has people living on top and underneath. Naturally, the people underneath are poor, and the towns are mostly slums, and it's the inverse on the top side. So once again, we have a clear distinction between 2 sets of people, and the city is divided up. In the movies we've looked at, the division was purely by the Lords of the Night, but in Final Fantasy VII, it's managed by Shinra, who represent and control the normal, topside population. So these are the 3 main inspirations for Fear and Hunger, as stated by Miro: Twilight, The Warriors, and Final Fantasy. Some links are obvious, some, well, not so much. We have a handful of other facts about Fear and Hunger 3, but before we dig into that, let's take a really quick look at some of the minor inspirations for the game. There's a couple more games that have been inspirations for the series and whose DNA will be found in the 3rd installment. They are, in no particular order, Silent Hill, Vampire the Masquerade, SMT, and Resident Evil.
Resident Evil.
Silent Hill is less of an explicit inspiration and more that it just lives rent-free in Miro's head, so it inevitably has tendrils throughout his work. Chrome Mauler and the Chaser enemies are the most obvious examples of this. SMT and Resident Evil have been background inspirations for the games too, so I don't expect them to have a particularly larger influence on 3 compared to the previous games. To note another inspiration, Serial Experiments Lane. As much as I'd love it to be a big influence, that doesn't seem to be the case. Miro only watched it after designing most of Logic's concepts, so it's not clear how much of it made it in, if at all. Lane hasn't been mentioned at all when discussing 3 either. Vampire the Masquerade, though. After going through 3 major influences and seeing how much Miro tweets about vampires, I think we can pull some pieces out of here. Vampire the Masquerade leans very heavily into the Lords of the Night theme, although the vampires range from beautiful, glamorous socialites to hideous monsters in the sewers and everything in between. That might be what we can expect to see an influence from. The idea that vampires aren't just hideous monsters and aren't just beautiful noblemen in a castle somewhere, but an average person twisted into monsters. What happens when an average person is thrust into this twisted world of the night and expected to adhere to Byzantine rules at risk of death? It's obviously similar to Twilight, but also The Warriors. But Miro did give us a warning. We might be overthinking the vampires. In fact, let's take a look at what other tidbits he's left us in tweets. Let's rapid fire go through some tweets that Miro has made where he's laid out some things that may or may not be in the game. Straight away, the jump between games will be big in terms of gameplay and aesthetics. The jump between the first game and Terminator was pretty big, but the jump from Terminator 3 will be even bigger. Naturally, Fear and Hunger 3 will be a teenage drama that explores themes of love and meaning of life and vampirism. Naturally. It may take place in the 2000s or 2010s around the era of Twilight. At the very least, it'll be more than 20-year jump after Terminus, so 1960s at the earliest. It'll definitely be a different time period though, with different characters and their own story, although it might not be quite modern. Modern tech, but different from what we have now or had in the 2010s. It will definitely have internet though. Each game had a slightly different aesthetic, and we actually got a hint as to what it'll be for 3. The original tweet is linked in the description if you'd like to see it up close. It's really cool. Miro's certain that the existing fanbase won't like it very much. Perhaps only 10% of the fanbase will stick around. What do you think? Are you a true believer who will stand Funga even if the 3rd game is bad? The reason why is that the idea he has is so divergent from the established Fear and Hunger gameplay, story structure, and aesthetics. Interestingly, he gives us a key to understand each game in the series. The first is about creation. The second is growing pains and change from that creation, and third will be about destruction, wiping the slate clean in-game and on a meta level. Honestly, he thinks people will really hate the next game. The Fear and Hunger formula, as he sees it, is something that just plays the same. The first game and Termina are realistically pretty similar in terms of gameplay, but also that the narratives are quite open, and the story focuses on things larger than the characters, and not really their own stories. The next game will probably be more story-focused and maybe even linear, due to all the loose ends it needs to wrap up. Maybe this is a connection to Final Fantasy VII, as the main story in that was almost completely linear. That being said, it'll likely stay the same genre. Miura considers the games to be a mix of roguelike, survival horror, and JRPG. The first game was more roguelike, Termina was more survival horror, so the last will lean more into JRPG. Because of this, it'll likely be less replayable, although that's not set in stone. The third game is a continuation of the themes of the games, or perhaps an end, and this was intended since the development of the first game. Naturally, this means that Termina has a canon ending and canon set of events. It might not be as secluded as the first two games. In both of those, they're isolated locations where most of the humans have either died or been transformed into monsters, so 3 might be less cursed. It'll likely have lots of NPCs who are actual characters too. Speaking of characters, Kahara probably won't be mentioned. Sorry bros. Really, he's probably not coming back. Sorry, no dating. Not even Pocket Cat, unless it's in the Dungeon Knights equivalent. We might even get a band of yellow mages. Maybe that'll tie into the clan idea from Twilight and Warriors. If he isn't already, Lagarde will become your favourite character. Honestly though, if he isn't, then why? Really, tell me right now. Finally, elves are confirmed. I'm going to hold you to this, Miro. The focus this time is on humans. Really, the games have always been about humans and their mistakes. The games won't be focused on fighting the gods because it's about humanity dropping the ball themselves. Although, Miro was cagey when asked about if Sulfur would show up. Maybe a cat girl cult of some kind. Jokes aside, this idea ties in with Miro saying that the gods might not be as powerful a force anymore. Or, more specifically, they may not be a big part in what comes next. It's not going to be some kind of god hunt, and it's not going to be in space. More of a low-key tale from a common person's perspective, and lower stakes than before. Naturally, this means it probably won't be an apocalypse story. Miro finds it pretty boring. He wants to destroy everything, but more in a meta and or personal character level. The current character designs skew feminine, although he will add some masculinity. Feminine designs, of course, don't mean that all the current characters are female, but we haven't seen any pictures yet either way. Right now, he doesn't have much work actually done on the project, just some concepts and music sketches. Honestly, we won't see anything for a very long time. Just like the second game's subtitle was Termina, as in Fear and Hunger Termina, the third game might have one too. The options so far are Love Will Tear Us Apart, Vampire Quest, or Detroit. Which was your favourite? Personally, I like Love Will Tear Us Apart, or LWTUA for short. As to the location, it might be set in America, or, as it's known so far in the games, Vinland. Maybe even Hollywood. If not, it's probably not somewhere cold, so even if it is in the US, it's not going to be set in Forks, Washington. And it's definitely not in space. Sorry, Event Horizon fans. It may even feature climate change. If Final Fantasy VII is an inspiration, then that makes sense. Miro seems hesitant here, so maybe the environmental focus from FF7 is a bit of a red herring. And finally, the release date, 2027. Mark it in your calendars, gang. Miro is notorious for hitting deadlines perfectly, so I expect to see you all there. Now we've gotten all the inspirations and such out of the way, let's put it all together. No, wait, first. Let's look at what the previous games did. Fear and Hunger 3 will still be a Fear and Hunger game, so there's bound to be certain conventions it will use. Miro did say it might break all the old conventions so hard people will say it's not a Funga game, but he also said that it might not. So let's just work with what we have, huh? What's the most important thing in Fear and Hunger? I'll give you a second. Right, fear and hunger. Good job. Obviously, the game will use sanity and hunger mechanics. What other similarities have the previous games shared that we can use? Obviously simpler stuff too, like books are a big part of the games, as are coin flips, but what else? Limb-based combat for both player and enemies is one of the major selling points in my opinion. It was the first game I'd seen do that, and honestly it's a fantastic mechanic that adds a lot of depth to each fight. Treating your own limbs as a resource is such a cool system. The games don't use traditional leveling systems either. Your character progression is entirely tied to equipment and spells and skills, and to a lesser extent gating party members too, both controllable and non-controllable. The maps in both games are relatively small compared to other games. The trade-off is that they're tightly packed and wind around themselves, allowing players to open up shortcuts between late and early game areas. The games also have some level of randomization. The first game had multiple sets of maps you could choose from, and Termina is getting random key item locations in the upcoming patch. I wouldn't say that randomization is vital, but perhaps some level can be expected. How about returning characters? People have actually asked Miro about some specifically, and it really depends on the story and setting. Lagarde is confirmed, and I'd bet money on Pocket Cat coming back. Nashra is explicitly a maybe. Who else? The Tormented One has appeared in both games, but he felt more like a cameo in the second. Obviously, Logic will play a big part, and the God of Fear and Hunger will probably pop up here or there. That begs a question. What endings from Termina are canon? Obviously, Logic being born is canon. It's the only ending that actually has a big effect on the world of Fear and Hunger. The game would practically be pointless without it. Dan almost certainly becomes Pocket Cat. Pocket Cat. In my Logic video, I suggest that Olivia, Karen, Abella, and Osar are the ones who activate Logic, and I genuinely think they're the canon people to do that. If it's ever confirmed, that is. At the end of Ending A, any survivors are freed from the festival, but that feels like a cop-out. Could any of them have won the festival? I think so. Levi and Marina have cover art privilege, and since the game was described as teenage girls with daddy issues in a battle royale, I think it's safe to say that Marina would win out of anybody who didn't get Ending A. Does her Ending B impact the rest of the world? Not really. In fact, the only one who does is Abella and her moon rocket, but again, I think she's inside Logic now. So, other than Ending A, not much else matters. So that's the mechanics and what is likely the canon endings, but what about themes? Well, they're not very mysterious if you pay attention to dialogue, thankfully. The main theme of the games is escaping humanity's cycles of violence. Humanity was trapped in cycles of useless new gods that only shifted once the God of Fear and Hunger was born, and Logic is Lagarde's next attempt to shift humanity forward again. Well, both still require unimaginable violence, so maybe we're not leaving that behind just yet. Humanity misunderstanding the gods is another. Humanity physically cannot understand the gods because they are greater than what we could possibly comprehend. Vice versa, they don't really understand us too. This was made explicit by the fact that Grogroth is called curious and wore human skin to interact with us. Perhaps we're like ants or insects to them. We can study a bug, watch what they do, dissect them, but never truly understand a bug's mindset. So when a human becomes a god, what do? They can't act like a god because they don't understand them, but they're no longer human. That's the subtle question posed by Olmir and the God of Fear and Hunger, and likely posed by Logic too. Can they truly be called a god when they're obsessed with human affairs? Maybe this will be a question addressed in the third game. And what of dead gods? Olmir's death has been a mystery from the start, and even with the introduction of Sulfur, we have more questions than answers. Venushka, the other main dead god, is a mystery. Miro said many times that there's certain themes and ideas he intends to tackle over 3 games, and I think this is one of the likely candidates for that, unless the upcoming Termina update answers it. If it does, then, well, come back to this video and correct me. A final major theme is humanity's endless attempts to raise themselves higher. Humanity have never stopped trying to become more than they are, to ascend to the very heavens. Olmir and the God of Fear and Hunger are the best attempts at that, until Logic came along. Logic was made to bring all of humanity to the promised land. Is that a Final Fantasy VII reference? And allow them to ascend together as one. Obviously, if there's another game set in the future, then it didn't pan out quite as intended. Even lesser stories like the Festival, or the New Gods, or even the Yellow Mage's search for power are reflections of this idea. Humanity's endless goal for ascension is almost certainly a primary theme in the third game. Okay, that was a lot to cover. Now, we know all about the inspirations, the previous games, and tweets. Let's put it all together and figure out what Fear and Hunger 3 will really be about. It's a survival horror JRPG with hunger and mind mechanics, limb-based combat, with rich lore and horrors beyond comprehension. Look, I know I just described Fear and Hunger 1 and 2, but bear with me. It's set somewhere in the US, after being fully colonized and built up in the time since Termina. The prime location is a dark, grimy city. The player can only go out at night because that's when the normies go to sleep, and they can rule the night. There's 2 playable characters, 2 lovers. They want to become vampires, which doesn't make sense because vampires aren't real, although some people do use blood magic. The city is controlled by gangs, or perhaps clans is a better word. There's the Yellow Mages, the Sulphur Cultists, and definitely some new ones. Clans or cults dedicated to each old god would probably be boring, so I doubt we'll have bunny and wolf mask cultists. The old gods are fading too. Their cults are incredibly rare by the time of Termina, and may even be wiped out after the Logic incident. Logic controls the daylight, the police, and the city. It is the hegemon of this time and place. As long as the gangs don't cross the line, the Logic forces don't care that much. What are the gangs fighting over though? The only thing worth trading. The only thing that's ever been worth trading. Souls. Drugs, magic, and code are all fueled for and fueled by souls. The gangs trade souls directly with Logic for some kind of boon, perhaps magical abilities in a similar way that Percolate handed them out during the festival. Magic isn't dead, but it has changed. The old gods are echoes in the machine. As part of Logic's ascension, she mimicked their powers and grants those boons to those who can perform certain tasks for her. They're not quite the same abilities as they were in the past, but the people aren't quite the same, and neither is the world. Trade souls, perform tasks, and Logic blesses you with a boon. What are the tasks? Maybe there's a bug in the machine that needs squashing. Maybe there's a part or a person operating suboptimally that Logic would like removed. Maybe there's a person who knows something that Logic wants to know, and the only way to obtain that knowledge is to send their soul to a database. The tasks are often abhorrent, and normal people pretend they don't happen, like magic and dark cults in the past, so only the Lords of the Night dare partake in it. As a result, these people are stronger and have certain freedoms that normal people don't, but are shunned and hired from normal society. They're the plumbers nobody wants trampling over their nice carpets. Well, that's the setting. But what about the story? It's a bit hard to say since we only know it's a love story. Bringing in that idea of self-sacrifice, I wonder if one of the lovers will have to sacrifice themselves for the other. As Miro said, the first game is about creation. Termina is about growing pains, and the third will be about destruction. But it won't be hopeful. A non-apocalypse story about destruction that isn't hopeful. One of the lovers is becoming a vampire, a Lord of the Night, and is being physically corrupted by this lifestyle. If they continue, these changes will become permanent, and they will eventually be unable to join Logic and enter the Promised Land. The other lover is on Team Logic, and is torn between the world of the normies and the world of the night. They're trying to save their vampire lover, to prevent them from being eternally damned, and are working their way up the Logic hierarchy to gain access to greater powers to do that. There's some kind of tipping point soon. Perhaps the vampire's final transformation and or gang initiation is coming. And to prevent that, the other lover sacrifices themselves to ensure their soul is able to join them in the Promised Land. In opposition, the vampire lover's playthrough is about them trying to save their Logic lover from what they see as a pointless afterlife in the saccharine green hue. They're trying to introduce them to what they think is the true purpose of life, the dark power of the night. Perhaps in the finale, they both sacrifice themselves for the other. A kind of Romeo and Juliet and fear and hunger. It's missing something. What's the big bang at the end of the game? I know Miro said he wanted it to be a more personal story, but you can't just end the Fear and Hunger trilogy with a romantic kiss and riding off into the sunset. Riding off into the green hue. What do you guys think? That's all well and good, I hear you say, but Mao, what do you actually want in Funga 3? Good question, audience stand-in. Screw the rules, watch my Funga 3 wishlist. Firstly, Nash Ra. I don't care how. Maybe he's a Tamagotchi or something. Actually, that'd be really rad. Can you please give us a Tamagotchi or a Nash Ra app on the in-game phone? However you do it, please just bring him back. Secondly, maybe this should have been first, lore. Give me lore, all of it. Actually, only give me half of it so I can make videos out of it. Please give us just enough lore to explain the ongoing mysteries, but with enough gaps that we have to argue about it for years. Please. Other than that, I think all my requests have already been answered. I wanted Lagarde, I wanted Yellow Mages, Elves, Catgirls, and all of those have already been hard confirmed. But seriously, it'll be really interesting to see Miro take on the world of Fear and Hunger from a different angle. a more personal angle. I can see what he means that people might not like it. When I first saw Termina, I thought the new direction was a bad idea, since I like the dark medieval fantasy aesthetic so much, but it didn't take me long to warm up to the World War II setting. Frankly, even if I hate the setting of 3, or the aesthetic, or the linear plot, or the characters, or whatever else Miro thinks will ruin it, I'll still play it to find out how the series ends, even if I'm seething the whole time. And to find out how correct I am in this video, which I'm sure is very, very correct, this video is 100% correct, make sure to come back in 2027 to tell me how correct I am. And say hello to future Mal. Hi Mal, how you doing? Like always, take this with a grain of salt. A jar of salt, a whole sack of salt. Miro's only given us scraps to work with, and he's known for changing his mind at the last minute. For Termina, the decision to make it a battle royale was last minute, just before he released the demo, and that's an integral part of the game. Before that, it only had 2 playable characters. So, even if this video perfectly captured what Miro was planning right now, it could, and probably will, change quite a lot before release. In fact, by admission, he's only done rough sketches and barely any planning, so there kind of isn't a game to spoil yet. Either way, I hope you enjoyed my theory crafting? Fan fiction? Is that what it is? Storytelling of some kind. Cross-media analysis of a game that doesn't exist. That's close enough. So what did you think? How close do you think I am to Fear and Hunger 3? And more importantly, what's on your wish list? Yes, let's all yell at Miro to get our wish list into the game while it's still early. Thank you very much for watching. If you'd like to support the channel, then the best way to do that is to check out my Patreon. I regularly post public articles there with behind-the-scenes information about my videos. If you want to find out why my last video bombed, I actually did a full free write-up about it, so make sure to go check it out because it's pretty interesting. You can also become a member to get access to scripts, videos a week earlier than the public, and even get your name in the credits. So thank you very much for everybody who's supported so far. Their names are on screen now. I'd also like to shout out a certain Disney princess. Thanks for being such a big fan. My name's Morve Duke, and remember, you're never alone in the dark. I forgot to say that last time.